Good afternoon and welcome to episode 47 of the Jacksonian. As I am yours truly, Jats Johnson, and I have with me is the editor of Hustle Belt and Underdog Dynasty, SB Nation, Steve Helwick. As we'll be going over quite a lot about the Group of Five world going on into AAC, Conference USA, and Sun Belt, and much, much more. Let me tell you something, folks. It'll be a wild ride. How you doing today?
Thanks for having me on, Jackson. Really appreciate it. I love being on this show, and I just love talking college football in general. Excited to see those week 0 matchups last week. All good matchups across the board, all within one score at some point in the second half. So excited for more action week 1 after week 0 was a real treat to us.
Oh man, it was awesome having some college football back on for week 0, especially, and we've got a lot of takeaways from that. And for those who don't know about you, would you like to tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Uh, Steve Helwick here. I've been covering college football for several outlets on SB Nation since 2016, and also back when I was in college at University of Texas, covered the football team there as well. And I've always just prided myself on being one of the 134 team guys, where I really watch and try to follow all 134 teams in great detail. I do wear a lot of hats and I cover a lot of beats. I live in Houston, Texas, and cover the Houston Cougars and Rice Owls most closely. But I've also been writing about the MAC since 2016, dating back to covering that Western Michigan Wisconsin Cotton Bowl back with that 2016 Western Michigan team that was undefeated. And I've also done a lot of AAC and CUSA work. I've been at media days for both of those conferences, been at Big 12 media days, and I'll usually cover around 20 to 25 college football games live a year, hitting up several bowl games. If there's a Thursday or Friday night game I can travel to, I always try to get up to there. You'll see me at Wisconsin, Western Michigan this Friday. You'll see me at Houston, UNLV this Saturday. So travel all around the country covering this great sport, and couldn't be more excited for this season to be back in session.
Well, and it's gonna be awesome seeing what's gonna happen with some of these Group of Five matchups. But first, we'd like to go over a little bit about the week 0 matchups that involve like New Mexico and Hawaii and Nevada. What was your takeaway from it?
So week 0, yeah, start with that Florida State Georgia Tech game, which was a real interesting one where I thought a lot of people were. I did not think Georgia Tech would win. Full disclosure, I did have Florida State winning a close one in that one, but I thought a lot of people underrated Georgia Tech with what they returned, and they already had 4 ranked wins under head coach Brent Key, so they've been punching above their weight a lot ever since he arrived on campus. And I thought that Georgia Tech, they had a returning quarterback in Haynes King who got a lot better from his Texas A&M days. You saw him both throwing and using his legs to beat that Florida State defense to the boundary a lot. And Florida State, I don't think people realize how much they actually lost to the NFL and how much they were replacing. And a lot of reliance on just hoping transfers pan out. So that's something that works at some programs. It worked really well at Texas State last year. Texas State just got a lot of transfers. They won their first bowl game, had their best season all time. But some programs, you got to get that talent in-house and start developing it first. And you can't just work on reloading portal every year. So Florida State has a lot of time to adjust, but that was a real interesting game to start the day. The second game of the day, New Mexico versus Montana State. New Mexico is one of the, I mean, I'll say it nicely, they're one of the programs in the FBS that's really starting from the bottom of the barrel, square one this year. I mean, it's a lot of overhaul throughout the entire unit. And Bronco Mendenhall, he's been a winner in the past before. You saw it at BYU. If you look at Virginia, I think he had 5 straight seasons in the 6 years at Virginia. He had 5 straight seasons of 500 or above records. When you look at the last like 15 seasons at Virginia, that uh and the ones that didn't include Bronco Mendenhall, they've only had one winning season over that span. So Bronco Mendenhall brought Virginia to a New Year's Six Bowl. He did good things at BYU back in when BYU was Mountain West first becoming independent. And I think that New Mexico could have hopes, but this team doesn't know how to win football games. And that was clear after squandering a 17-point fourth quarter lead to an FCS team, Montana State. I know it's a good FCS team, but still, inexcusable game to lose down the stretch. You can't allow a one-play 93-yard drive late in the game. That'll doom you there. And it was unforced errors, missed field goals, drops. It was just a masterclass on how to blow a lead. So New Mexico needs to figure some things out, and they'll get there first. But that game was kind of eye-opening that the Lobos just aren't there yet. SMU Nevada was the most surprising game for me, even more surprising than Florida State, Georgia Tech, because I thought SMU was just going to go there and decimate them. That's what they did in AAC play last year. There were games where they played Temple, Tulsa, they scored 50 plus points. The defense would pitch a near shutout or a shutout, and the Mustangs were just dominant on both ends last year. One of the best offenses in the country, one of the best defenses in the country. So much returning talent on both ends, where I thought SMU was just primed to punch him in the mouth out of the gate, because over the last 2 seasons combined, I would say Nevada has been the worst FBS team. 2 straight 2-10 seasons with some really bad losses. 2 straight seasons, Nevada lost by double digits to an FCS team. So I thought SMU was going to really steamroll them, but the Mustangs just couldn't get anything going offensively early in that game. Nevada, they look like they have a lot of grit under this new head coach, Jeff Choate. I know Rhett Lashley said in the post-game press conference that SMU, they were really frustrated by Nevada in the first half, and Nevada did a good job of mucking up the game. So it looks like we could see a new era of Wolfpack football. It was a very promising start to the season for Nevada. So you lose the game, you blow a double-digit fourth-quarter lead, but I don't think you hang your head down. I mean, you nearly took the reigning AAC champions, a team that finished 24th in the country last year. You took them, you played them really well for 58 minutes before things went south. When SMU converted some key third downs, they got that safety late in the game, and then tight end RJ Maryland, a future NFL talent, just took over. But Nevada can hang their head high. Bowl eligibility is not out of the realm of possibilities this year for them. So that was pretty good. Then the nightcap with Hawaii. I was surprised. The run and shoot offense, Timmy Chang, I thought it would do a lot better than it did against Delaware State. I know Delaware State's been a lower end FCS team the past few years, but Hawaii just didn't really do what I expected with a returning quarterback and Braden Shager, some skill position talent around him. It was 14-14 at one point in the second half, and I really thought that Hawaii was going to win this game like 70-14. So a bit concerning for Hawaii, but it's also week 0, and unexpected results can happen earlier in the season. There was one year Northwestern won in week 0 and then lost its last 11 games. And sometimes teams just have trap games like that. Last year, Kansas finished ranked. They beat a 2-10 Nevada team 31-24. So sometimes early in the season, just slip up like that. So I'm excited to see these teams all get an extra data point in week 1, as none of them have a bye this week.
Yeah, I've noticed that a lot of people tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater after week 0, week 1. It's like, oh, this team's going to be god awful because of that game against like Nevada. Oh, well, you won 31-24. Oh, you won 29-24. You can't be doing that. You're going to have a bad year. It's like, let's see how the rest of the year pans out first.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think SMU's one of the best examples of that. They're 1-0. It's not like Florida State that already chalked up a loss and they're in danger of their losing an ACC championship. SMU has a perfect standing. They have an FCS team this week, a good get-right week before you have BYU and TCU and some tougher opponents coming on the schedule.
Yeah, and I was going to say, like, this is the first year we're seeing SMU at a power conference, which that's pretty huge for them. This is like one of the biggest things since they were in the Southwest Conference. I mean, and last year they ended that 39-year conference title drought. But for those who don't like counting the 80s conference titles because of, well, obvious reasons, the SMU scandal, I guess. I mean, people can look back as 1966 as that last legitimate conference title. That was under Hayden Fry at SMU.
Yeah, it's been a long road back, but yeah, I was at the AAC title game last year. Very triumphant for SMU. I mean, you watch the program really be proud of what they rebuilt from, because that death penalty really did them in for years. And even in the 2010s, like back in 2014, they were losing every game by 40 points. So really good rebuild that Sonny Dykes started and Rhett Lashley took to another level there.
Yeah, and at some point, I mean, I would like to see if SMU gets like a 10-win season this year, because if they do, like, the question will be, does Rhett Lashley stay and try to make SMU the premier Texas team? because they're in the ACC, kind of like how TCU was running the show in the Mount West for a little while when they were there? Or does he try to take his talents to Arkansas on account of it being his alma mater, or does he try his hand at Florida or anywhere else?
Yeah, it will be interesting to see there with the coaching carousel. But I think SMU's been getting a lot better recruits now. They're in a hotbed recruiting area in Dallas. One of the biggest benefactors of the transfer portal with so many kids that want to go home. Now you're playing ACC. I know it's a little tough because you don't have a team closer to Georgia Tech than you geographically, and that's like a 12-hour drive. So that's a little tougher, but SMU's got the money. I mean, their donors funded all the money that they're losing from not getting ACC media rights deal pretty quickly. So it'll be interesting to see how their season pans out.
Well, and we're talking a little bit about like group of 5 coaches that are possibly going to leave for power forward teams. Um, I wonder if Jamie Chadwell is going to be leaving this year, and is there any other candidates that I'm missing out on, particularly besides like Jason Candle and another few guys?
Well, Jamie Chadwell's a really interesting case because of the offensive scheme he runs. And it's going to be, do some of those programs want to fully indulge themselves in the full Jamie Chadwell experience? I mean, he runs basically a spread triple option, which is kind of a unique scheme. Not too many teams from conferences like the ACC or SEC have taken chances on unorthodox schemes. Georgia Tech did, getting Paul Johnson from Navy back in the day, and they tried their hand at the triple option, and it worked for a bit. I mean, they won the 2009 ACC title. They won a New Year's Six Bowl in 2014. So if there's a program that's really struggling to find an identity and a way to win, I could see them trying to take a chance on Jamie Chadwell and seeing if this spread triple option with heavy RPO utilization works. I mean, it's not too far off from some of the things Kansas ran last year with Andy Kotelnicki as their offensive coordinator. He's going to Penn State now. I don't think Penn State will use as much motions and eye candy in the backfield and is more like as option like of an offense. But I remember last year or 2 years ago covering a Houston Kansas game, and Dana Holgerson said that preparing for Kansas was like preparing for Navy. And I think that's the very same with preparing for a Jamie Chadwell team, just because of what they do in the backfield with all the option concepts that they implement into their RPO heavy offense. And it worked out well for Coastal Carolina. They were a ranked team in 2020, finished the regular season undefeated, and it's worked out for Chadwell at Liberty. Year 1 at the helm, he gets Liberty to the Fiesta Bowl. Yes, they lose 45-6 to Oregon, and their schedule didn't really prepare them for an opponent like that. But Liberty really ran through most of the schedule, and they didn't have too many closely contested games. So I think Chadwell system really gained ground in this USA, and they have another pretty manageable schedule this year. And I think they have a target on their back, and it'll be interesting to see how they measure up in year 2, getting Caden Salter back, getting Quentin Coley back, and Chadwell could be a hot candidate if Liberty does replicate their results from 2023.
Well, I mean, if they can replicate their success from 2023 and go unbeaten, win the Conference USA title for a second straight year, I mean, that they would obviously get in that 12-team playoff. But who are some candidates that I'm missing exactly? Like Tulane, of course, obviously. I mean,
I think the premier candidate you'd have to look for from the AAC is actually Memphis. But here's my biggest problem with Memphis is if you had to pick who the next 3 toughest teams in the AAC are besides Memphis, you'd go South Florida, you would go UTSA, and you'd go to Tulane. You look at Memphis's schedule, they play all 3 of those teams on the road. So that's 3 road matchups, big road matchups, and they have to come out unscathed probably in 2 of them. Non-conference, they have Florida State, which beating Florida State doesn't mean as much as it would have if we had this conversation 7 days ago. It would have been nice if Florida State entered that matchup, 2-0 or 3-0? 2-0 before Memphis got to play them, because that would be a massive win. And I think it's a winnable game for Memphis. Their offense returns so much. Seth Hennigan, I think the only 4-year starting senior quarterback in the country who started 4 straight years at his program. And Hennigan's improved each year as a starting quarterback. He has his top 3 receivers back: Rock Taylor, Demir Blankumsey, Kobe Drake. So Memphis is loaded offensively, and then defensively, I think Memphis's defense has been a bit of Jekyll and Hyde the past few years. Not always the best unit, but I think they reloaded well from the transfer portal. They have a star linebacker in Chandler Martin, who was first team All AAC last year, who's really everywhere on the field. Good run stopper, had like 16 tackles for loss, good in coverage too. So I think Memphis has made the strides. We saw their defense against Iowa State last year in the bowl game. They held Iowa State to 0 rushing yards, and that only involved 2 sacks. So it was really them just dominating the line of scrimmage. And that was with a new defensive coordinator calling plays. So if that can continue this year, Memphis, I think, is a great candidate for that spot. Another one I would point to is South Florida. South Florida has Alabama on the schedule. I would expect that to be a loss, even though they had the Crimson Tide tied 3-3 at halftime last year, which was really impressive. But what I like about South Florida is their dual threat quarterback, Byron Brown, who I think is as dangerous as an improviser as anyone in the country. Him and Jaden Daniels were the only quarterbacks last year to throw for 3,000 and rush for 800. And Byron Brown, I feel like, just keeps getting better with every time he takes the field. So South Florida is another team like Memphis where, are you going to shore up the defense? Because South Florida's defense, they had their moments last year. They had the Bama game where they held them to 17 points and had just tons of sacks. They had that Syracuse bowl game where they pitched a shutout, winning 45-0. But then you have games where you give up 56 to UAB and FAU. So find a defensive identity, and South Florida can be that team. I think that's in that mix for a playoff spot from the AAC. And then just one other team that you're talking about from some of these conferences that aren't always well represented in the playoffs, Boise State. I know I was highly criticized them going Maddox Madsen as their starting quarterback over former 5-star Malachi Nelson, but I think he probably won a battle in camp, and coaches like what they see with him. Boise State, they really came on strong last year toward the end of the year, getting a conference title. So I do think that I'm pretty high on the Broncos this year as well. And they have Ashton Genty, who's as dangerous as any running back in the country. Could be one of those top 10 Heisman finishers this year if he produces the numbers I think he's going to.
Well, I'm looking at those first 2 games. I mean, Boise State, Georgia Southern looks pretty underrated because, I mean, I've noticed that Clay Helton's done a pretty good job at Georgia Southern because it's like I just kind of like look back at the irony where it was 2 days after he got fired by USC because they got routed by Stanford. Then it's a year later, Georgia Southern's going against Nebraska, and that was basically, as a friend of mine would call it, the Fisher Price hammer was put down on Scott Frost the next day. So it was like it was like weird timing, but it's strange world after all.
Yeah, Georgia Southern. They started the last year really strong at 6-2, and they dropped their last 5, including the bowl game. It felt like we were watching 2 different teams throughout the season. But what's really interesting about that program is how they've revamped their system. They were a triple option team for a long time, and then they under Coach Lunsford, and then Helton comes in and really makes them one of the most pass happy teams in all of the FBS, where you're consistently seeing 40 passing attempts per game. Davis Brin last year, Kyle Van Treese the year before. So I think it's interesting how Georgia Southern kind of had that schematic shift, and I'm looking forward to that first game against Boise State and see how they do. I think Boise State should be able to get the win in Statesboro. I know they've already tried to prepare the humidity conditions in Georgia when practicing. So yeah, that'll be a nice week 1 warm up before they go play Oregon, which is going to be possibly a season defining game for the Broncos.
Well, I'll make sure to do my part to watch that game on the Peacock app. I'm just like, I don't like Peacock, but there's college football and NFL, so I'll be like, I'll put up with you for a time being. And there's the Ted sitcom, so I like old Seth MacFarlane. But I wonder if UNLV can get it done, because I mean, I know you mentioned that you're going to be covering a little bit of UNLV Houston this week. What is your take on it so far?
UNLV returns more than half the starters on offense and defense. And the thing was, UNLV, they've been bad for so much of their history. Just 1 winning season between 2004 and 2022. and they went 7-6 in 2013. But Barry Odom comes in and immediately wins 9 games and unlocks the potential of this program in year one, makes the Mountain West championship game. UNLV, they have a star receiver, Ricky White, third in the country in receiving yards last year. He's one of those receivers that can take over a game. You're going to be seeing him play on Sundays in the future. So I think their skill positions are excellent. They have a bit of a quarterback battle. Jaden Mayava, who surprisingly transferred to USC to become a backup after leading UNLV to that 9-win season last year. So UNLV now has to choose between 3 options, and they all listed them as a potential starter on the depth chart. Matthew Sluka, I think, is the most intriguing one. He was an FCS first-team All-American at Holy Cross. Really good dual-threat quarterback, as he had insanely good touchdown-to-interception ratios, like stuff like 26-4, and then he's rushing for 1,200 yards in consecutive seasons. So I'm excited to see how that translates to the FBS level. But, yeah, that Houston game, it's really close. I think Houston's just a 1.5-point favorite right now. The Cougars trying to find an identity under Willie Fritz in year 2 of the Big 12, kind of changing up its scheme a bit from air raid. So UNLV might have to see a bit different stuff on defense than what teams saw playing Houston last year. UNLV's pretty strong offense. I don't have as much concern there. I think defense is where they have a bit more reloading to do. Jackson Woodard, their starting linebacker, excellent first-team All-Mountain West last year. And they have a few other all-conference pieces around them. They revamped their secondary with transfers, and that's probably the biggest concern I have with them is their passing defense was not up to standard last year. But if they can get that up, yeah, they can contend very well for the Mountain West again. I mean, they were just a Mountain West championship game win away from winning the league last year. So I would probably put them as the number 2 contender in the conference behind Boise State right now, even if the quarterback position remains an uncertainty.
Well, and I'm wondering how Fresno State's going to be looking without Jeff Tedford. How are they doing, by the way?
Yeah, they have Mikey Keene back at quarterback, and Keene was pretty decent last year. He really grew a lot from that 2021 UCF season where he was kind of just thrown into the fire after Dylan Gabriel suffered a season injury. It's crazy, all these moving parts at quarterbacks and now how they all start. They start at different schools and end up different places now. But Fresno State last year, I mean, they didn't have too many like really good specialties. They were an above average offense and above average defense. It was a team that started really well in the season. They looked like they could crash that New Year's Six bowl, and then they just fall apart late in the season with some questionable losses down the stretch. So losing 3 of their last 4 before, and then they won the New Mexico Bowl. So Fresno State's a really intriguing team to me. They got Malik Sherrod back, who was a near 1,000-yard rusher last year. So I think that the offense should kind of sustain some of its firepower from a year ago. And then, yeah, working under an interim coach isn't easy, but we've seen some teams succeed in that situation before. We mentioned Georgia Tech earlier, how as soon as Jeff Collins was fired and Brent Key took over, Key did pretty well with him. David Braun did a great job at Northwestern last year in a program that was projected to finish last in the Big Ten. They finished 8-5. So we've seen some interim coaches work some magic before, and I'm interested to see if that can translate to Fresno State, who I don't know if I put them in the Boise State UNLV tier, but they're probably not far behind.
Well, a little while ago, we mentioned like Jamie Chadwell possibly being a candidate for like a Power 4 school. If UNLV is having like another huge season like they did last year, will we see Barry Odom be like, you know what? I'm going to do it again in the Power 4. Or is he like, you know what? I'm appreciated and I'm in Vegas.
You've seen different coaches take different approaches at that time. I don't know if he'll go kind of the Lane Kiffin approach. I mean, Lane Kiffin was Tennessee, USC, and he signs a 10-year contract after leading FAU to 2 conference titles. You wonder if that's going to be a long-term solution for him. And then he heads to Ole Miss, and he's had plenty of success there. I wouldn't surprise me if Barry Odom did leverage this UNLV success into another job. I mean, he took over Missouri after a very prosperous era under Gary Pinkel when they won the SEC 2 years in a row in the 2010s, and he just couldn't live up to that. He only had 1 losing season at Mizzou. It was just they weren't able to replicate those 11, 10-win seasons that they were having in the early 2010s, and so he was kind of a victim of the expectations of Mizzou at the time. But it wouldn't surprise me if he got back in the mix, because transforming UNLV in year 1 was probably the most impressive thing he's done as a coach so far, because nobody else has been able to win in that program for a long time. So I think Barry Odom could be an interesting coaching candidate. And he was not one of the names I'd put at the top of like Houston's list when they hired Willie Fritz, but he was a name I think that was maybe down there. He didn't really have the familiarity with the state of Texas and all of that. So I think that some team might take a chance on him if he does what he did last year.
Well, and it's going to be interesting to see what goes on with UNLV and if they can make magic happen like they did again, like top what they did last year. And there's been a lot of conference realignment palooza, like good grief. And
Yeah.
it seems to have quieted down for now. And we knew that SMU was like the last one to like leave their group of 5 place for now. If it happens again, who is the most likely out of the group of 5 to join the Power 4?
I think this all has to start with the SEC and Big Ten getting bigger. If those teams get bigger, then conferences like the Big 12 and the ACC will adapt and add teams. So if I know Florida State was suing the ACC, if Florida State leaves the conference, then the ACC is going to want to restock. Where is the ACC going to look? Well, you have a market in Tampa with South Florida football. That was a team that had some hype during their Big East era back with Matt Grothe in the late 2000s. They had that year where they were ranked number 2 in 2007 for a week. So yeah, South Florida, I think they've fallen on some hard times lately, but last year you see them rebuilding the program. And what's it going to look like at Raymond James Stadium? And I know they're getting an on-campus stadium, which is probably going to be a lot better for the program and building a student fan base. What's it going to look like there if they improve this year? They're an AAC contender. I think they can make the conference championship game. I'm predicting them to actually make the conference championship game because I believe that much of Byron Brown in that offense. So I do think that South Florida is probably a candidate that the ACC would reach out to if it ever lost to Florida State or Clemson or North Carolina. I think another team that's really intriguing is Memphis. Memphis is a team, football wise, they have one of the longest bowl streaks in the country. I mean, I think there's only 6 teams or so that have been bowl eligible every single year since 2014. So Memphis's consistent winning tradition has been really impressive, and they've done it under multiple head coaches, going from Justin Fuente to Mike Norvell to Ryan Silverfield without much of a drop off. So Memphis is another team that I would probably look to in there. Big city, big market, lots of potential there. And also, I think their basketball program could be attractive as they have a lot of history and tradition too. And they have had number 1 recruiting classes recently under Penny Hardaway there. So that's another team that I think would be really intriguing for that. And one last one I'd like to point to is UTSA. I think UTSA has probably improved its brand more in the past 10 years than maybe any other program, because UTSA was an upstart football program in 2011, joined the FBS in 2012, and they just had some billion-dollar endowment that makes them like the 3rd most endowment, I think, of schools in the state of Texas. I think their enrollment has grown, and their football team, I've go to the Alamo Dome, and they can pack themselves on Saturdays with like T-shirt fans, not just UTSA alums, because they're the only football show in town. They don't have an NFL team there. I mean, and UTSA has been really good under Jeff Traylor. They won 2 CUSA titles. They were a win away from making the AAC title game last year. And UTSA has really established a good brand, and they've really brought on a lot of fans in the past few years. So I think UTSA is another program that's just scratching the surface of what it's capable of.
Well, it's going to be fun seeing more of the magic that Jeff Traylor has done at UTSA, especially this season. I mean, I love what he did at the Conference USA in the final years there and what they've done last year and what they can do again this year. It's going to be tremendous.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's a team that's replacing a program legend and quarterback Frank Harris, but I think they remain pretty strong on defense. They lose the top pass rusher in Trey Moore, but their defensive tackles, they are massive. They're going to win a lot of those battles in the trenches on defense against AAC competition. And I think the rest of their skill positions and offense look good. That's a team that I voted them 3rd in my preseason AAC media pull behind Memphis and South Florida, but I think UTSA can be right back in the mix. I think this program, Frank Harris did a great job, and I think that the passing of the torch to the next era is going to work out well for them because Jeff Traylor's done nothing but win since the second he got here.
And he's definitely going to win some more for sure. And on that note, we end this episode with a happy week 1 to all, because I'm gonna tell you right now, it's gonna be awesome. Like, we got our appetizer, and now the 4-course meal is coming, especially on Thursday night. And for those who want to tune in, see what you guys say on the AAC Sunbelt Conference USA, and many more in the Group of 5 in Houston, and even the Spurs. Where can they find you?
Yeah, my handle's on the screen, S_Helwick, Steve Helwick. You can find me anywhere covering games. I'm usually somewhere on a Saturday on the weekend covering a game in a press box, but also have lots of other screens, so I'm monitoring all 134 teams at once. Happy to talk football from all the way from Air Force to Wyoming, alphabetically. So excited for this season and excited for Thursday through Monday, just 5 straight days of college football. So it's going to be a good season, I think.
Oh, man. All I could say is cue the Peanuts music for sure. And you can also check out this man's articles at Hustle Belt and Underdog Dynasty on the websites. Don't forget to check it out. And as for me, you can check me out on Jackson Johnson 979 on YouTube, where I'm 134 subs away from that magic number 500. And I need all the help I can get to 500. So like, comment, subscribe, click on the notification bell so you do not miss another video whatsoever. And you can also check me out on X at Jackson09960335, and on Instagram and Threads on Jackson Johnson 543908, where I give updates on what's going on during the week, and I run my mouth about my takes on what's going on. And of course, you can check me out Monday afternoons at 5 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Crimson Tide Live with Johnny Burtz on SEC football at the Voice of College Football and Alabama football at the Voice of College Football. And until next time, this is Jackson Johnson from the Jacksonian, wishing you all a happy afternoon. Stay safe, stay cool, stay away from that heat. Take care.